I send greetings from Yorktown. I also send greetings to my wife, Mary, who normally is here with me, and she usually has a part of the service, but she couldn't make it today. She has some commitments back home that she had to stay for. And since she is definitely the better half of this combo, this duo, I feel like I'm shortchanging you a little bit. But I'll try to do my best today without her here. We have been really blessed, Mary and I, to be able to minister in Italy. Our calling has been to minister to the indigent people living in Italy, those that have come to Italy from different parts of the world. And I'm going to share a little bit more about that in a little while. But what I wanted to do first is we put together a short video set to music. It's basically pictures we took while ministering in Italy. And I put it to music, and we call it Images from Italy. And it'll give you a taste of what the ministry in Italy is like. So if you guys can run that, that'd be great.
Niente più dolce di stare con te, nient'altro io fare, solo star con te. Mi diletto in te, Signore. Mi diletto in te, alla tua presenza. Niente più dolce di stare con te, nient'altro io fare, solo star con te. Mi diletto in te, Signore. Mi diletto in te, alla tua presenza. Niente più dolce di stare con te, nient'altro io farei, solo star con te. Mi diletto in te, solo star con te. Mi diletto in te, mi diletto in te, Signore.
For many of you, I'm sure that those pictures are not what you would have expected ministry in Italy to look like. But I can assure you that every one of those pictures was taken there. See, Italy is being overrun by refugees and internationals from all over the world. They're coming from Africa, Nigeria, Togo, Kenya. They come from Asia, the Philippines, Sri Lanka, even South America. One of my interpreters up there is from Brazil. There's South Americans that are coming to Italy. They come to Italy to flee war, persecution, or hopefully to find a better way of life, to escape poverty. But unfortunately, they don't find it there. Many that were once engineers or successful businessmen in their home countries come to Italy and end up taking jobs as cooks or gardeners or nannies. Many times, entire families will rent one room from a wealthy Italian, and there they struggle to survive as a family. They're unemployed or underemployed, they're desperate, they're downcast, they're hopeless. But the good news is that because of these struggles that they're going through, they are more open to the gospel. And many of them are hearing the gospel for the first time. They come from countries that are not open to the gospel. And so we've seen a lot of fruit in the ministry there. Not only do they come to Christ, but a lot of times they'll lead their Italian hosts to Christ as well. And eventually some will return to their native lands where they will bring the gospel message with them. And in many times it's a closed nation. So when we reach Italy, we are really truly reaching the entire world. Now unfortunately, the native Italians, for you Italians out there, are not so open to the gospel. You see, they've heard it all before. And the native Italians have built walls up around themselves to protect themselves from a historically very abusive and controlling church. When you minister there, we've heard it many, many times, you'll hear the expression, odio la chiesa ma amo Dio, which means, I hate the church, but I love God. But in reality, Italy and the Italians have embraced secular humanism, which is a rejection of God. They have no faith, just man-made superstitions. There's no hope, just despair. It's become a very spiritually dark nation. And we always think that Italy is a Christian nation. It's not. It's far from it. Only 6% of Italian Catholics would be considered devout. Only 2% of people in Italy are evangelical. Over 70% of Italians go to church once a month or less. So it's become a very dark place. They have embraced other religious expressions, and they have rejected the cross of Christ. We are believing that God is going to tear down these walls. And we are going over there believing that if we can raise an army of prayer partners, that God will see those walls fall just like Jericho fell. And so we're asking you to please stop by our table and pick a prayer card. We have these forms. You would be kind if you want to join with us. Prayer partner contact form. Fill it out completely. What we do is we'll send you our newsletters. We send them sometimes by email. Sometimes we just send them through U.S. mail. But we also have a place there, if you're interested, you can check a box if you can receive texts. We will send out text prayer requests occasionally. Won't be every day, maybe even once a week. It will be occasionally we have a prayer need in front of us. We like to get our army of prayer warriors praying. And you might ask, well, why don't you just email me the prayer requests? Well, only 30% of emails get read. Right, Tammy? We used to have these long emails at work, and I don't think we got through them all. But 99% of texts get read. So we have this system where we can send out text prayer requests. So we would appreciate that if you would join with us. Stop by our table. We also have a couple of CDs there for sale if you're interested. One's worship songs in English. The other one's worship songs in Italian. So if you're interested in that, they're there too. Mary and I have been very, very privileged to go to Italy now 5 times on short-term paths. Those 2 weeks we were there. It was just unbelievable. And I don't have time this morning to share a lot of testimonies, but I do want to share one with you that really hits home with me. I like to cook, okay? I'm not a very good cook, but I like to cook. So I asked my 4 guys to come over to our house we were staying for breakfast one morning. And I realized, when they walked in the door, I realized I never bought the orange juice. Now, how can you have breakfast without orange juice? I mean, you can't, right, in my book. So I told the guys, listen, I got to run out to the supermarket. It was right around the corner, and get the orange juice. So they said, well, we're not doing anything. We'll come with you. So we walk out to the supermarket, and now, for those of you who have been to Italy, you might remember this. Italy, the Italian people are not the most punctual people on the face of the earth, okay? They're not the most organized people. When the supermarket says it's going to open at 8 a.m., maybe 8:15, 8:30, it might eventually open. When they get there, they'll eventually get there. But so we walk over there, and sure enough, it was supposed to open, and it wasn't open yet, and a line had formed out front. So we got in line, and immediately in front of us in this line was this little man from Spain. And we could see he was very downcast, very distraught. And so we started sharing Christ with him. We started sharing testimonies of what God has done in our life. We started sharing scriptures with him. And he was soaking it in like a sponge. He was really interested. So after a while, we said to him, listen, would you like to receive Christ in your life? And he says, yes, I would. So there was probably about 20 people around, and I said, would you mind if we prayed for you right now? And he says, no. So we gathered around him. We led him through the sinner's prayer, and we started praying. Jesus has promised me. I believe that I can get through life because of what Christ has done for me. And so I told Mary, I says, I'm so glad I forgot this orange juice that morning, because who knows what would have happened. But this is the ministry in Italy. There are hungry, needy people there that need Jesus desperately, and there's not many outlets for that. We are going to pastor the International Church of Rome for the next 2 years, and they would like to churches in an area there are no churches. There are no evangelical English-speaking churches to reach these internationals. And we reach both. We reach Italians and internationals at our churches because the preaching is in English, but we have an Italian interpreter. And so I would say about 80% of the church is internationals and about 20% are Italians. We have been blessed, as I said, to see many, many people's lives affected by the gospel message. But I have to be honest with you and tell you, it's not something I was really excited about doing, about going to Italy full time. And I want to share with you a little bit about that testimony of that calling. Mary and I first were going to Italy in 2009. And we were going actually for a second honeymoon. Our 25th wedding anniversary was December 31st, 2008. And so we had decided to go to Italy in 2009. But because of our church's vision for missions, we were encouraged to turn it into a missions trip, which we did. And we brought over a lot of supplies and needy things for our missionaries. And we developed relationships with each one of them and started emailing them and praying for them. We started supporting some. And we figured whatever we can do to help the ministry in Italy, we will do. Well, 2 years later, on June 5th, 2011, I get an email from one of our missionaries that I did not get to meet. He was actually in the States when we were there, itinerating, so I didn't get to meet him. His name's Michael Hopkins, and he sends me a one-line email. He says, Joe, how would you like to fill in for me for a month while I take a mini sabbatical next year? And I'm like, now, I don't know if you knew this, but I'm an accountant, okay? I've been an accountant for 30 years. I wasn't even credentialed at the time. And so I'm thinking, what does he want me to do, fill in for him? So I emailed him back and says, Mike, what's this involved? And about 10 days later, he responds and he says, pulpit ministry and whatever the church needs you to do. And I turned to Mary and I said, he thinks I'm a pastor. He has no idea I'm not a pastor. So I keep reading, and at the end of his email, he says, I know you're not a pulpit minister, but God has put you on my heart to do this. So I was like, Mary, how can we say no to this? What an opportunity. I'll never have this opportunity again. That's what I thought. I've learned never to say never, okay? Because every time I say never, God shows me that that's not true. But anyway, at this point, I'm thinking, I'll never have another opportunity to do this. So I respond to him, okay, yes, we'd love to do this. And I immediately started working on my credentials because I figured if I'm going to be behind a pulpit for a month, I wanted to be credentialed. So I start working on that with the Southern Missouri District. And shortly into this process, I hear a voice, God whisper in my ear, this is going to be your full-time ministry. And my immediate response in faith was, no, it's not. God, I'm an accountant. I am not a minister. I'll fill in for these missionaries, but I'm not going to be there full-time. I kept at it. This is going to be your full-time ministry, Joe. And I could think of every excuse in the book while that wasn't going to be true. And I did. And I would tell him, God, I'm too old. I'm too old. The World Missions would never send someone like me with no experience at my age. I had all these obstacles blocking my path, these mountains in my way. And I just couldn't see how it would happen. But he would not back off. He wanted me to go, and he was calling me to go. So about 3 months later, in September, it just came to the head. I was getting really tired of the battle. I didn't want to fight God, but I just couldn't believe he was sending me. In fact, I told him, I lived in Springfield, Missouri at the time, and I says, God, I know at least 1,000 people that are more qualified to go than me. Send one of them. And he's like, no, I'm sending you. So I went to a prayer meeting at our church. Every Sunday night we'd had a prayer meeting. And this was a very informal thing where the church would put on a whiteboard all the needs of the church, and you would go in and you'd sit at a seat or kneel at a seat and just pray over the needs of the church. And then if I had time, if I finished that, I would start praying for personal needs, family needs. And so I go into the church to pray at this prayer meeting, and I get through all the things, and I have just a couple minutes left before the evening service is going to start. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to put the ball in God's court, so to speak, and say, God, and this was my prayer. I'll never forget it. I says, God, if you are calling me to go to Italy, you need to remove the mountains from my path. You need to open the doors that are in front of me, because I could not imagine AG World Missions would open the door for me. And you need to provide the funds, because it's going to be very expensive. We had known missionaries for years that struggled to raise their support. And here, a novice, a newbie, how am I going to do it? So I says, God, if you're calling me, you need to do these things. You need to remove the mountains. You need to open the doors. You need to provide the funds. And that was it. So I stood up, because the prayer meeting was pretty much ended, and I see Mary sitting about 3 or 4 chairs away reading her Bible. And it reminded me, I like to read through the Bible every year, and that morning I only got through Isaiah 44. I was supposed to read through 46, but I ran out of time. After church that morning, we had company. Before I knew it was 4:30, I had to take my mom back to the nursing home and get to the prayer meeting. So I thought, well, I still have like 10 minutes before the church service. Why don't I read those 2 chapters of Isaiah, Isaiah 45 and 46? So I opened up to Isaiah 45. I'm going to read to you verses 2 and 3 of Isaiah 45. Now, please remember the prayer I prayed 30 seconds before. God, if you're calling me, remove the mountains, open the doors, and provide the funds. So this is what the Lord spoke to my heart that Sunday evening in September of 2011. He says, I will go before you, and I will level the mountains. I will break down the gates of bronze and cut through the bars of iron. I will give you the treasures of darkness, riches stored in secret places, so that you will know that I am the Lord, the God of Israel, who summons you by name. And as soon as I read that, I realized that God had just taken away every excuse I had. And it finally dawned on me, something I heard all my Christian life, but it just sunk in, is that God does not call the qualified, but he qualifies those he calls. And we were qualified to go, not because we were eloquent speakers or gifted in any way. We're qualified because God has called us to go. And so I learned a few things that night that I'd like to share with you, because I'm sure I'm not unique in this situation. God often will call us out of our comfort zones, and he will ask us to do a job that we feel is beyond our ability. And when that happens, don't be surprised if the enemy of our souls will throw obstacles in your path to keep you from fulfilling that calling. And these obstacles take the shape of imposing mountains, closed doors, or lack of money. And just like he promised King Cyrus before he was even born, he promised King Cyrus that he would make his paths level so he could return the Israelites to Jerusalem to rebuild the wall and the temple. If he's going to do that for this heathen king, certainly he's going to do that for us, his children. Let me talk to you about mountains. I grew up in the Hudson Valley area of New York, and if you've ever been down there, you know how beautiful it is. The mountains come right down to the river, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. And I've always loved the mountains. We've done a lot of backpacking up in the Adirondacks and in the Catskills, and I just love the mountains in the natural sense. In the spiritual sense, not so much. Right? We like to be on top of the mountains. We don't like to be facing mountains. And when God whispered in my ear, this is going to be your full-time ministry, all I could see were mountains blocking my path. I couldn't see how to get around them. What I had forgotten is who the mountain mover is, that we serve a God who's in the business of moving mountains. All right? And Jesus, in fact, told us in Matthew 17:20, if you have the faith of a mustard seed, which is not very big at all, you could say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. So I'm looking at these mountains, these imposing mountains, that, one, they block your vision. You can't see past them. And two, they're intimidating. They make you feel small and insignificant and weak. I'm looking at these mountains, and instead of looking to the Lord, I'm looking at the obstacles in my path. God had to remind me that He is the mountain mover. I didn't have to move the mountains. He was going to take care of it for me if I just asked in faith. And so what I want to encourage you is that when God calls you out of your comfort zone and the enemy starts, don't be surprised if he throws a mountain in your path. But just remember who the mountain mover is. God will remove that mountain in His time, and you will see miracles happen, just like He did with us. He removed every mountain in our path and opened every door. Let me talk about doors. My door that appeared closed was my age. Now, no man, no demon can close a door that God has opened, okay? So the enemy knows this. So what he does is he tries to make it appear that they're closed to discourage you, or that they will close or they won't open. But just remember, no one, no man, no demon can close a door that God has opened. My door was my age. When I worked at Somebody's God headquarters back in college days, I was on the night maintenance crew. There was about 30 of us on this crew cleaning this large facility. And most of us were in college, and most of those in college were going to Bible school to become pastors and evangelists and missionaries. And I happened to befriend many of the guys that were going to be missionaries, and they're still my friends to this day. I've been friends with them for 34 years. And they shared with me their vision, their passion for missions, and I was a brand new Christian at the time. I can remember praying, God, please don't call me into missions, because I didn't want to leave New York. I wanted to come back to New York and work here. But I was, brand new Christian. But in any case, the buzz around the office back then was, if you're over 35, don't even bother applying to be a missionary, because they don't want you. Do you remember those days? That's how it was back then in the early to mid-'80s. And so this has been in my mind for years. I figured, I'm too old. So when God whispered in my ear, this is going to sound funny, but it's actually true. The first thing I said to Him was, God, do you know how old I am? I was 49 at the time. I says, God, I've missed my window. I've missed it, all right? The AGWM is never going to take me. I'm over 35, and I have no experience. How silly of me that God's going to call me to do something that the doors won't open to. And those were the rules back then in the early 1980s. They're not the rules today. And even if they were the rules today, isn't God capable of circumventing these man-made rules? If He's called me to go, He's going to open that door. So the enemy had me convinced that the door wouldn't be open, but that's because I didn't have my eyes on the Lord. I was looking at the obstacles in my path. Of course, God opened the door. A few months after this Isaiah 45 experience, the head of Europe took Mary and I out to dinner with his wife, Angie, Paul and Angie Tremontozzi. And he told me during that dinner, he says, Joe, whenever you're ready, we have a place for you in Europe. It's like, door opened, God had opened that door. But you know what? It was never really closed. It was closed in my mind, but it wasn't closed in reality, because our enemy cannot close any door that God has opened. Let me talk to you about funds, money. That always seems to be on the forefront of our minds, especially for me as an accountant. Money, I'm always budgeting. I'm always thinking about, how am I going to pay for this? And so when God called me to go full time, all I could think about was the costs. It's like, like I mentioned, we've known missionaries, veterans for 30 years on the field, that every time they itinerate, they struggle to make their budget. And I'm thinking, how am I possibly going to do that? I have no experience doing this. I have no great testimonies to share, compared to these other people. How am I going to raise our budget? And I forgot again who my Father was in heaven. What's the Bible say? God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. And He not only owns the hills, He owns the oil and the minerals. He owns the cattle as well. His resources are infinite. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it. If God's calling me to go, isn't He going to provide for me? Isn't He going to give me? If you're a parent and you send your child or a son or daughter on a mission, aren't you going to equip them to do it? Of course God's going to do this. I was too busy looking at the cost. Our itinerating, our budget for Italy is very expensive. Europe is very expensive to live in. We had debt we had to pay down. We have itineration expenses that we're trying to cover out of our pockets so it won't keep us, out of Italy for very long. And then we're going to take a cut in salary that's about 1/8 of what we usually make. And it's like, God, how can I afford to do this? But God had to remind me that He's going to take care of us. It's a step of faith. And instead of looking at the money issue, I need to look to my Father in heaven. If God is going to promise this heathen King Cyrus that He's going to provide for him to do this job He's called him to do, how much more is He going to do it for you, the apple of His eye, His children? So I just want to encourage you, when the call comes, He may not call you to missions. He may call you to teach a Sunday school class. He may call you to lead a youth group. He may call you to sing in this worship team. And I have to tell you, that was one of the most anointed worship services I can ever remember being at. The harmony. I closed my eyes. I thought I was like before the throne of God, the angels singing in heaven. It was beautiful. Thank you, worship team, for that. That was just a beautiful worship service. But anyway, whatever God's called you to do, He will equip you to do it. He'll remove the mountains from your path. He'll open every door that needs to be opened. He'll provide the funds. So when the call comes, don't do what I did, but instead follow Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct your path. Amen? Amen. I want to close with just a quick testimony. I have a few minutes just to give you another taste of what God is doing in Italy. One of the trips we took, we were invited to be a part of an 8-week-long vacation Bible school. And this VBS was going to be in Padova, Italy, which is about 40 minutes outside of Venice, west of Venice. And I could only get 4 weeks off of work, so we came for the last 4 weeks. And they asked us to bring a team, so I recruited 8 other people to come with Mary and me. And we trained the team. We raised money. We came over with the theme was going to be a Western theme, because all Italians think we're all cowboys anyway. I'm about the farthest thing from a cowboy you can get. But anyway, we came over with cowboys and cowgirls outfits, and it was really a lot of fun. But it was a lot of work. And the first 2 weeks we were there, weeks 5 and 6 of the VBS, we were kind of just helping, assisting other teams. And they needed a lot of help because we had 105 unchurched kids from Padova. Most of these kids, in fact, I think just about all of them were not born again. So week 3, though, was going to be our week. We were going to be putting on the VBS for week 3. And so this was the week we were really gearing up for. And the normal schedule for the VBS was in the mornings. We'd have a prayer and staff meeting very early in the morning, and then the kids would come in. We would start the VBS, then we'd stop for lunch, and then in the afternoon we'd teach English as a second language. And then at 4 o'clock we would gather all the kids together out of the classrooms into one final closing service that went till about 4:30. And there we would kind of do a recap of the day, memory verses and stuff like that. We'd sing some songs and stuff. But every Thursday we would have an altar call and asking if kids want to receive Christ into their heart. And we had seen many, many, many kids come down the previous 2 weeks we were there and give their hearts to Christ and go back, and it appeared to us they were going back exactly the same way they came down. We did not see any change. And so that Wednesday morning of our week 3, week 7 of the VBS, Mary and I are sitting in the room just before our staff and prayer meeting, and we are probably the most discouraged we had ever been in our Christian walk together. We were just so discouraged. All the hard work that we did preparing, all the money we had to raise, and it just didn't seem like we were having any effect on these kids. And so I said to Mary, I'll be honest with you, and I confess, I says, Mary, the last thing I want to do tomorrow is have an altar call, because it just looks like they are just mocking us. They'll come down, they'll pretend to give their hearts to the Lord to go back the same exact way. And what was really irritating me and getting on my nerves was the constant fighting these kids were getting involved in. Now, these are aged 6 through 13. They were only supposed to go up to 11, but we ended up taking several 13-year-olds as well and 12-year-olds. And there was probably about, 20, 21 kids that were fighters, just bullies. And they would disrupt every class. And I couldn't count how many times I've broken up fights. On at least 2 occasions, I had to physically carry a boy down the stairs on my shoulder because he would not move. And some of these kids, especially some of these African kids, were bigger than me. And it was very intimidating, and it was a very stressful week. It was physically exhausting, spiritually very challenging, and it was an emotional roller coaster. So we are sitting there contemplating tomorrow afternoon doing an altar call, and that's really the last thing I wanted to do. But I said to Mary, I said, you know what I would really like to do is address the fighting issue. So I went to the missionary and I said, would you mind if we did something a little different tomorrow night? And she was like, no, that's fine. So we prayed about it in the staff meeting, and I had everybody praying. So Thursday, 4 o'clock comes. We gathered 105 kids into a room, and we sing a couple songs. And then after the songs are done, we have them sit, and they're sitting on the floor. And as soon as they sit, the fighting starts, the pushing, the bullying. People are trying to break them up. So I grab the microphone, and I start telling them a story about a little boy who grew up in a house where his father was so violent that he would beat him and his siblings and his mother with a belt so badly that they would have welts on the back. And as soon as I said that, the entire room got quiet. Like I had their attention. Apparently, some of these kids had lived through that themselves. So I started telling them how this boy became very violent himself, and he became a bully. And he would go around town beating up kids just to make them feel better about himself. And he would always constantly get in fights, and as he got older, he became more violent. He became a vandal. He would vandalize buildings and houses and was getting in trouble with the law. He started drinking and doing drugs, and just his life was spiraling out of control. And before he turned 20, he knew that before his 21st birthday, he was probably either going to be in jail or dead. And again, that got their attention as well because many of their fathers were either dead or in jail. So I'm telling this story, and I pause, and I look at him, and I said, and that little boy was me. And they gasped. They could not believe that this person, this man that loves Jesus, could have ever been that way. You see, they've never seen a life changed by the power of God. They've never seen it. And so I started telling them about how someone told me about Jesus, and I realized this was the only way I could ever probably change. And so I accepted him into my heart, and he took away my anger, he took away my violent temper, he took away my hatred for people, and he replaced it with a love and a kindness. And I started loving people that I had never loved before, and I asked people to forgive that I've hurt. And as I'm telling this story, I'm getting very emotional, and I could see that they're getting emotional as well. And so I kind of whispered to Mary, I says, I should have an altar call, you know. So I did. And I said, listen, if you are a bully, if you're a fighter, if you're a violent person, and you want Jesus to change your life, I want you to come down to the front. And I says, I don't want you to come because everybody else is coming. I only want you to come for that reason. If you're a bully, if you're a fighter, and you want God to change you, I want you to come down. If I had asked my team that morning to write out a list of the bullies from these 105 kids, I am fairly certain all 10 of us would have had the same exact list. When I finally called them down, those 21 kids came down. And they didn't just come, they were weeping like I had never seen kids weep in my life. And they came down, they knelt down at the altar, and we quickly got people to pray with them and lead them to Christ and pray for their deliverance. And it was just an incredible thing. I had never seen anything like it. And then the most incredible thing after that was when they got up, they started going to other kids at the altars, in the seats, and asking forgiveness. The missionary said she'd been doing this for 15 years. She'd never seen anything like that. God is moving in Italy. He's reaching these people that are desperately lost. And we can't wait to get there to be a part of it. because we know, not because we're so wonderful. We're not. We're just plain ordinary. I'm just an accountant. But God will use us when we're open to that. And so we're really grateful that we could share our vision, our heart with you. I didn't share this with you before, but when we're done in Rome, we're going to be in Rome for 2 years. We want to plant churches in other parts of Italy. And our long-term goal is, after we establish a few churches, we want to start an orphanage. Because a lot of these international women are either forced into or choose prostitution. And they end up getting unwanted pregnancies, and they can't even afford to pay for their own food, let alone a child. A lot of times they'll abandon these children. So Mary and I God has given us a vision and a burden to reach these people. And we would be so grateful if you would join with us and become our prayer partners and take our prayer cards home and sign up to be our prayer partners, because we can't do this alone. We need your prayers. We need your help in order to see these people, especially the Italian natives, come to Christ. So thank you so much. Pastor, thank you for allowing me to come. God bless you.